This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Engage webinar. Today, we have a very exciting topic with two great speakers. Today, we're going to be talking about retaining your talent and reducing employee attrition. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is David Bradshaw, and I'm the Vice President for Client Care at ATB Financial. And just a quick thing on ATB Financial, we are a regional bank located in Alberta. And our primary purpose is to serve our clients throughout the province of Alberta.
Great. Eli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Happy to. So nice to see everyone today. My name is Eli, and I lead the Omnichannel and Contact Center practice at Burnie Group, and super excited to speak with David today about attrition. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eli. So just a couple of things to go over before we kick off. The session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording after the webinar. We're in listen-only mode for the presentation. But if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A. You can submit them throughout our conversation, and then we'll go through the questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, so to start us off, David, what are some common reasons why an employee leaves a company?
So the most common reasons I've seen, they usually leave because of the leader. Because people leave people. So, primarily I see people leaving because of the leader. The other reason why people leave, because there's a mismatch in job fits. So, the way how you recruit the individuals, the job that they expected and that they thought that they were getting is not the role that they're getting. And the other reason why I've seen people leave is just out of personal reasons. So nothing against the organization. They've just come to a point in their lives where they want to change or they want to do something different, and they leave to pursue other opportunities.
Okay. Eli, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts I have. One is, as I think about the current market and there being a real demand for talent, I think ultimately there's more choice for employees, especially in contact centers today, and they get attracted by multiple opportunities. It could be a chance to get promoted somewhere else. It could also be a chance to make a bit more money. There was a time when I didn't think what you were being paid was as meaningful as some of the items that David spoke about. But I've heard a number of stories from clients where, you could leave and go work for Tim Hortons and get a signing bonus. And I was seeing contact center frontline employees literally move into retail just for the attractiveness of dollars and cents. So that'd be a couple other perspectives that I'd share.
Okay, so adding on to that, what makes working in a contact center unique, and how might that affect attrition?
Well, I've got my thoughts on that. So here are the things that make the contact center unique. So first of all, everything's scheduled. So your breaks are scheduled, your lunch is scheduled, so you don't have the same flexibility or freedom in terms of other roles. The other thing too is that depending on the types of interactions that you're receiving, some of them could be monotonous. So it may be your 15th call helping a client unlock their online banking or to reset their password, but it's the first time that client's called. And the other thing that's also unique about the role is that there is a tremendous amount of pressure on team members to perform. So for two reasons. Number one, they represent the brand because, the contact centers tend to be at the tip of the spear when things happen in the marketplace or when things tend to go wrong. They're the first place that people try and contact. And the other thing is it takes a lot of energy. You're not allowed to have a bad day. So, if I call Air Canada and I speak to someone at Air Canada or any other type of organization and I don't get a warm reception, I'm not going to think that that person's having a bad day. I'm going to think that that company is not very good. So they represent the brand, and it's very, very important for those team members to be at their very, very best 100% of the time. And that takes a lot of energy to do that.
Should I just jump in, Courtney?
Yeah, go
I
for
feel like
it.
I can just jump in.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, David, those are all excellent thoughts. And what couple of things that I'd add. One is I just want to focus on the stress component for a little bit, because I think all of us have thought about our mental health and well-being getting through and just about over a pandemic. And contact centers in particular went through enormous stress and overload because many were suddenly working from home and they weren't really prepared to work from home. And that transition in a contact center environment is substantial. So while many contact centers have gotten used to it and they operate virtually, it's a unique culture and environment to begin with. And now you're trying to replicate that in an environment that's really targeted for independent work. And contact centers have always thrived, certainly in my 25 plus years in this industry, in terms of the people and the engagement and the connections. And that's a lot harder to do now when you're virtual. So I think that it's kind of, we'll call it a uniqueness within contact centers specific to being virtual. The second piece is when I think about stress, think about what it's like for a frontline employee. If every time they come into work, we'll just take the phone as the channel of choice for a moment. David talks about you representing a brand and the weight that carries. Well, think about being in an environment where you can't really catch your breath and you're getting call after call after call. That becomes a very difficult environment to work in. And so your ability to handle that stress, the support that you receive, all of that becomes very meaningful. And so that for me is another way where there's just a unique stressor, as I would call it, especially when you're in a service level crisis working in a contact center.
Yeah, and Eli, I would really add to the stress level. So let's add on top of that, you're at home and you're by yourself, right? And you don't have anyone to turn around. You don't have that buddy or that partner to say, hey, even hand signals, because you really talked about contact centers thriving in a social environment when you were when contact centers were primarily on premise, and that's gone. So how do you create that support system in a virtual environment when you're in your room, wherever you are, wherever you're taking your calls, but you're isolated because you don't have anyone around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad we're hitting this one hard, because as I think about conversations I've had with clients, with colleagues, even friends in the space, figuring out how to operate virtually and do so in a really successful way is a constant challenge. And so I'm hopeful that just gives you a couple of nuggets to be thinking about as you dive deep into your own internal culture and environments, because it is very much challenging to stay at home in this space.
You've already touched on a lot of ways that the pandemic has affected contact centers. There's been a lot of talk about the Great Recession. Is there anything else that you want to add about how the pandemic has influenced attrition?
Go first.
Yeah,
Eli had really talked about it. That the big thing is the stress. Is the stress. The other thing that you can sometimes see when you're working 100% from home is there's an unintended consequence, and it's not malicious. It's not people trying to do things nefarious. What you see happening is that sometimes your home life and your work life actually bleeds into your work life. So just take, for example, you're working, you're by yourself, the dog needs to go out, the pet needs to go out, the doorbell rings, a partner, a spouse, someone comes into the room and says, hey, what do you want for lunch? And what are we doing for dinner? You get those actual little interruptions in your day. And those interruptions can sometimes be 30 seconds, a minute long. But imagine, those 30 seconds or those minute long interruptions getting extrapolated over, say, 100 people. And then, so what does that do to your capacity? It starts to take away from your capacity. And then you get to where Eli was talking about, sorry, where you get to the point where
All
Eli
good.
was talking about,
All good.
I know, but you get to the point where Eli was talking about, which is it gets busier. So you almost start to create your own busyness because you're stripping away from your capacity. Those are one of the things that when you're working in a virtual environment, you really have to make sure that the interruptions don't actually start to impact and take away from your capacity, where you start actually creating your own issues with service level because you just don't have the same availability because of those interruptions.
Yeah, I love that, David. And the one other thing I would add is I think the one group that's had to very much rethink what they do is recruitment. I think as I look back in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of rethinking about what is the right approach to get the very best talent because it's so super competitive. How am I marketing this organization? What am I doing to create the right candidate experience that's going to make me the employer of choice? And so resourcing teams, and this would include onboarding, these are processes that are crucial to getting that right. So thinking about how you create job profiles, what does the interviewing look like? Are you leveraging really interesting technologies that can accelerate that process, even using capabilities such as AI? All of this is what I'm seeing in the marketplace. And those that are rethinking those elements of their companies are starting to get an edge. So that'd be the other piece that I'd add around how the pandemic has affected this space.
Yeah. And I would add one of the things, because we've done some work before, Eli, and one of the things that you really opened up our eyes for, and it's something that I think people have kind of forgotten and gone away from a little bit, and it's one of the things that I believe we need to double down on when you talk about job profile and hiring, which is, so how do you expose potential candidates to the work environment? Like what how do you show them, like, this is what life looks like if you were to accept this role? And that was one of the things that you and I had talked about when we were working through some work back in the late fall. So that's one of the things that we are definitely going to be looking at from a recruitment perspective is, how do you show them, like, this is the job, this is the work, so that when they actually come on board, they don't get this shock or surprise in terms of the role, even though you've been very descriptive and very transparent and so forth, until they actually see it and feel it. It's a different story.
Oh, completely agree. And it's especially relevant if you're bringing in someone who hasn't worked in a contact center before. And whereas before this idea had real legs, they could just come in and look at your environment. If you're virtual, you've got to figure out a way to replicate what's happening at home so they can actually get a feel for it. Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. So this is a question that builds on everything that you've been saying. What are some elements that employees are seeking in new employers today, especially in contact centers?
The big thing that I'm hearing is flexibility. That is this work and life balance is really, really ringing true. So looking at the way how one of the things that that we're going to have to take a look at is, like, how do you schedule people? Like, do your rotational schedules and your shift bids, do those work today? They may have worked in the past, but do those work today? So you've got to relook at how you schedule your individuals and schedule your team members to allow that kind of work-life balance. So balance the needs of obviously delivering great experiences to your clients, but also balancing the needs of delivering great experiences to your team members. So they both go hand in hand, right? So that's one of the things that we will definitely be looking at is the way how we schedule, because I think the scheduling of the past needs to be relooked at.
Yeah, that's a really good thought, David. And it might not make things as easy for those in WFM, but with the right technology and creative thinking, I think it's doable. And the other thing I'd add, for any of you who joined the previous webinar we had with Kathy from EQ Bank, we did a webinar on the employee journey. And as David talks about the experience, this for me is very much where the focus needs to be and how to really stand out from the crowd in such a competitive field as contact center. So without going too far into the journey itself, but really you think about the candidate experience, which we've touched on a little bit now. What is that end-to-end feeling like from the moment you open yourself up to working somewhere till you get hired? We'll call that the candidate experience. And we talked about recruitment and onboarding and how you feel through the interviews, et cetera. And then there's another component around the journey when I'm now working at company X. And so it's more than just making sure you can develop and generate a career. It's also about how milestones are recognized, the balance between personal and professional. How are you being engaged? It's very prescriptive, but in a highly flexible way that's customized to that culture and environment overall. So that would be another key element for me, in addition to flexibility, would be the journey as you move into a new company.
I couldn't agree with you more, Eli, because the actual journey mapping, again, which you and I have, the employee journey mapping for the employee experience, it's not only mapping out the ideal state. By journey mapping, you can actually understand like what's going wrong.
Absolutely.
In the journey. It will help you with a more scientific approach to attacking the attrition issue.
Yeah, absolutely. That's essentially the exercise, David. You're absolutely right. As we think about journey mapping, mostly we think about customer journey mapping, which is its own element and also super important to understand experience. This essentially is taking the employee perspective, and the idea is to start as that diagnostic, understand where things aren't as good as they need to be, and then creatively and collaboratively internally shape and map that out, and then most importantly, commit to that experience moving forward. Completely agree.
Yeah.
I think everything that you're saying about the employee journey touches on our next question. What are some notable ways that employers can prevent attrition?
Eli said it when he talked about the journey mapping. And so one of the things that you can do is if you don't understand the experience of what's being delivered to the team members, you're basically shooting in the dark. You're guessing because there are attempting to fix the attrition issue is not a one size fit. It's not a magic bullet, right? So you've got to look at who you're recruiting. You've got to look at the onboarding and training. You've got to look at how you incubate people, where you're doing the hypercare before they actually start taking your interactions with your clients. Then you have to look at the experience that they're getting when they actually move on to a team and they're being led by the leaders. And then what does that whole training, upskilling, career development path look like? Because if you don't map that out, I truly believe you don't understand that and you don't map that out, you're going to be guessing, and you're going to only be fixing partial issues within the employee experience. I really believe that the employee journey mapping, if we're doing it for the client experience, you do it for the team member experience. And if you don't understand it, I think it's really very, very challenging to fix the issue.
Yeah, David, those are great thoughts. I'm going to add a couple of additional areas of focus that I think are more important today than ever, based on some of the talking points we've already gone through. And one of them is communication. I think it's essential that employees understand what they're doing, how they're performing, when they need support, how to get it. And it's both proactive and reactive as it needs to be, because a contact center naturally can be a very reactive environment. But it was already difficult and a major pain point with most contact centers I've supported or worked in before. Now that it's virtual, typically it's even harder because you're depending on other tools which aren't as personal, such as chat, the phone, email, etc. So being really tight and disciplined on communication and helping employees feel connected to the company, to their work, to the value that they're bringing to customers and one another, I think is essential. The second piece is about making personal connections. And David, you've touched on this somewhat already. I just want to add that, again, especially with that virtual lens, how are employees making those connections, either with each other or with mentors in the company and or their leadership? But just being able to connect, I think nowadays, post-pandemic, feels like it's more meaningful than ever before. And you've got to be really conscientious and thoughtful about how that gets done. And I would also suggest that for those contact centers, and you're a participant and you're 100% virtual, I would encourage you to find some way to at least come into the office every once in a while, even if it's just to help foster meaningful connections. So those are just a couple of additional targeted areas that I'd add.
And I would add one more just to layer on, which is when you start to go down that path, Eli, fun. You've got to bring back the fun, and it needs to be frequent. So to help to let your team members know that they're heard, that they're listened to, the personal connections. So bringing back fun and making sure that you double down on creating a lively environment and rewarding people for the littlest things will go a long way in terms of the creating that great work environment.
Completely agreed. I would, Courtney, I don't know if we might have another question, or maybe we're jumping to the Q&A, but I'm just going to share this. It's slightly a bit more broad, but I know we've got a whole bunch of contact center experts on this call. A concept that I've been sharing with a number of senior leaders very recently is this notion of back to basics. I've been lucky enough to be in this space for a long time, and I'm very excited by all the technology that's evolving in our space. I probably don't have a day go by where someone doesn't reach out and want to talk about ChatGPT. It's great. It's exciting. I'm all for technology as a firm. It's one of our differentiators on how we try to help businesses perform smarter and better. I do believe in the contact center space, there's still this notion of the back to basics. And when you think about the essentials, and David just hit a couple of them, right? You just think about culture, coaching, training, the kind of customer experience you're trying to generate. Having fun, right? Like these seem so obvious, and sometimes I'm still, I step back and realize, wow, there's still a lot of work to be done, especially if you've got an enterprise of, 300, 400, 500, maybe 3,000 people. Think about how difficult that is to get everyone singing from the same playbook. It's really difficult. So I would just leave everyone with the thought that while it's exciting to think about innovation and technology, please don't lose sight of the basics, all of which we know quite well, and ensure that you're rethinking them being in a virtual environment. Okay, I'm jumping off my soapbox. Thank you.
So we've had a question come through. David, you mentioned bringing back fun to the workforce. Are there any good examples of how you've created a sense of fun in your contact center?
Yeah, I'll give you one example. So what we did is we created a group recognition chat. And in this group recognition chat, this is where we send in all the client compliments. So stories get written up about team members in terms of the client compliments. This is where we send notifications of where team members got promoted, where people are moving along in their evolution within the contact center. And I personally make it a point of weighing in and tagging people and, letting them know congratulations, letting them know that they've been seen and that they've been heard from me, and all the other leaders weighing on this. And the cool thing about this is when you go in there and a team member gets a compliment from a client and the client's giving them 5 stars, it lights up because everyone's just weighing in, and you now start to get you now start to see these team members, the ones that deliver great service. You start to see some great habits building, and sometimes you see the same team member in there multiple times, so you can actually start creating stories and having a little bit of fun with the team members and customizing your messaging or your responses to those team members. And I found that was a great way for us to engage our team members and actually use the tools that are available to us in chat. And it just creates a lot of excitement. And there's, our contact center is about 390 people, and 100% of our people are in that chat group. And so it's busy and it takes a lot of commitment. And, Eli talked about energy and communication and, and making sure that you focus on it. And that's what we do. It takes a lot of work, but it's well worth it.
That's
So
a
we
great
have time
question.
for one more question. And this sort of builds on what you were saying, David, about how you interact with your team as a leader. And something that you said at the start, how sometimes employees leave because of a bad leader. How important is the role of a leader when it comes to retaining talent?
Critical, because that's where the rubber hits the road. So, you got to think about that's the person, individual that's influencing that person's career. That's the person that they interact with the most. So it's highly critical that not only do the leaders have the capability, but going back to Eli's point around communication, around coaching, going back to the basics, making sure you're spending the time with those team members, because the leader's role essentially is to ensure that that team member is being successful. End of story. And that's why they're so critical. And that's why we lean into our leaders and the leadership development that we have here. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I completely agree, of course, David. And I would just add, if there's something prescriptive for this team to take away, is to really enforce the notion of flexible and adjustable leadership, right? So I think more than ever, there's not really one size that fits all. I think there's some good basics in terms of how to operate, how to talk to people, how to communicate, how to be supportive, all that stuff. But making those adjustments and having those conversations shaped a little differently depending on the person you're speaking with, and even to the extent of getting into profile discussions, whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs, but just figuring out what makes someone tick just starts to give you a bit of an edge in terms of getting understanding and more so commitment.
Eli, you hit the nail on the head, as opposed to always talking about average handle time and what you're doing on the phone and talking about the stats all the time, because leaders tend to lean into that the most.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ask about them, talk about them, like what's going on with you, how can I help you, and start the conversation that way, as opposed to lean into, I've got a couple of ways how you can improve. Let's talk about your efficiency, like the standard conversations that you would typically have. You're absolutely right, Eli.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Courtney, I know we're just at time, so I'll revert back to you to help us close. Sorry.
So thank you both for your great insights. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Your expertise
thank you, David, so much.
So informative.
So, thank you for having me.
So the last thing that I'm going to share with you is, I'm just going to pull up the slide so everyone knows what webinar we have coming up next. So we have another great edition of our Engage webinar on April 5th. That's going to be Eli talking with Marco from Bell about how interactive voice response, or IVR, shapes customer experience. So since all of you have already attended this webinar, you're already registered to attend our next one. So we look forward to seeing you on April 5th. And again, David and Eli, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye for now.